Welcome to The Facts and the Furious, the podcast covering science, or lack thereof, in the Fast and Furious franchise. My name is Melissa Miller. I'm one of your co-hosts, and I'm also a science writer and write for Star Wars Insider magazine.
And I'm Dr. Lisa Will. I'm a professor of physics and astronomy. In this episode, The Facts and the Furious is going to cover the fifth movie, 2011's Fast Five. And we're going to chat with a visual effects artist, so stick around for that.
First up, we want to say that we're thrilled to hear that the WGA got a great deal, but we also want to acknowledge the creative work of actors who are still on strike, without whom we wouldn't have these amazing movies. Hopefully they'll get their own fair deal soon.
Okay, let's dive into the physics questions.
Yes, and joining us for this part of the episode is my Star Warsology's podcast co-host, James Floyd. He also has a background in city planning, so he's going to give us some insights about that.
We're going to do one last job. We're going to take all of Rez's money, every dime of it, and disappear forever.
New passports, new lives, no more looking over our shoulder, and we're just going to buy our freedom.
That's right.
You realize we're talking about going up against the most powerful guy in all of Rio?
Yes, we are.
Then we're going to need a team. All right, let's run through the bases real quick. Who do we got?
First, we're going to need a chameleon, someone who can blend in anywhere.
What else?
A fast talker, someone who can bullshit their way out of anything.
I got that.
This guy's gonna have a lot of surveillance. We're gonna need someone who's good with circuits.
I'm on. Not the only one. And with those circuits, Reyes is going to have walls. We're going to need guys to punch through those walls.
What else?
Utilities and weapons. Someone who ain't afraid to throw down. Someone to back up every position.
Yeah, what else we need?
Most importantly, we're going to need two precision drivers. Guys that don't crack under pressure. Guys that never lose.
You know we got that.
So James has some information about city planning and stuff like that to share with us that pertains to all the movies, but especially the amazing heist scene here in Fast Five. Welcome, James.
Hello. I am excited because this is Brazil.
Brazil. Yeah, I think this remains my favorite of the movies. Like every time I go back through my rewatch, this one just kicks it up a notch. Always excited about Fast Five.
Yeah, same. It's kind of where things start to just get ridiculous. And so it's exciting. Plus Dwayne Johnson.
Right. Yes.
Yes, the introduction of Hobbs into the franchise.
Cool. Well, let's get into our physics questions. Finally, I feel like we are earning our keep here in terms of physics nonsense, Lisa.
It is so true. Up till Fast Five, pretty much these movies were straightforward car chases. And obviously this movie got a budget, boost. And this movie also obviously had a directive, let's not do as many car chases. So what do? They basically went full comic book, which I really admire in terms of the ridiculousness of the stunts. And we will be talking, of course, about the amazing heist stunt.
Well, James, why don't you tell us a little bit about what work you used to do in the transportation sort of office and how you see the Fast and Furious movies potentially differently than the rest of us?
Yeah, I used to work for a state's Department of Transportation as well as a regional planning agency doing transportation planning, which is kind of figuring out, forecasting what future traffic demand is going to be on the infrastructure, and then planning out when can we program out the money to build this, and then finally, how are we going to put this in? And then that switches over to engineering, where they start actual plans and designs. And then, of course, we review those to make sure that other directives are met. One of the things I used to do specifically was bicycle and pedestrian planning, as well as transit planning. We would look at plans and see, oh, hey, there's a highway going to cut through here, or they're expanding lanes. How do we make sure that bikes and peds can still get through the area, which is always key? Or how can we just make a slight improvement that ends up making a big improvement for transit flow?
So when you watch the Fast and Furious movies, what do you see that rings true or horribly false?
I do tend to look at the urban environments. I one to be like, okay, where was this shot? If they turn here, how big is this? And then looking at things of like, oh, hey, here's street furniture. During the vault heist, they're tearing over bollards and ripping apart bus stops, as well as going through parked cars. You have cop cars on the sidewalks. So I kind of notice all that things in terms of just like street layout and design.
So when you see something like the vault heist, regardless of whether or not you can pull a vault that fast, which is something we will be talking about, seeing it swinging through the streets, are you cringing like, oh no, it's going to hit, like you said, that bus stop? Like, is that what you're seeing, or are you just enjoying the ride?
There is no, oh no. I actively like things being destroyed in these types of movies. The more that gets crushed and destroyed and battered and blown up, the better.
Yeah. Well, and they don't really show the aftermath of these things ever. In like the MCU where they talk about like that company or whatever that comes in and has to put the city back together. We don't talk about that at all in Fast
No,
and Furious.
there's a lot of insurance claims going on.
Right. Yeah. And do you blame these vigilantes and stuff like that? If they get their cleared records, does it also clear them of liability for bank vaults swinging around the streets of Rio?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, no.
There's a lot of civil suits waiting to happen there.
We talked about that a little bit in episode 2, with our legal expert. So yeah, this movie really gets started pretty fast, right? It's like seconds after the 4th movie, right? Because we see the idea that the prison bus escape is going to happen at the end of 4. So this one's literally just like a couple seconds later. But no casualties, thankfully.
I know. And yet that bus rolls several times.
So many times. At least we have any idea of how these people might have all survived.
They didn't. I mean, we just have to like be honest about that, right? They didn't. And what I found most interesting about that scene, and I remember it even the first time watching it, was just like, wow, a lot of people died in that. But then they very clearly established in like a news blurb that there were no fatalities. And this is like the first time. And then they continue to do it sprinkled throughout the rest of the franchise. Our heroes, our family does not kill people, at least not innocent bystanders.
One of the things I noticed about the little news blurbs is one of the news guys is the guy from Parks and Rec, I think. Herb. Yeah. So yes. He's got a news gig out on the West Coast.
No, and I really wanted it to be the same character because apparently the actor who plays Perd Hapley in Parks and Recreation also started out as a newscaster. That is his real job, but then he became an actor, and so I love it. Perd Hapley, gold star. So that was exciting to see him. But yes, you're right, Lisa. It sort of establishes this thing that I think we see almost every movie. And we see it in lots of movies, right? It's a really good storytelling device of like a narration, a summing up of what's been going on and all of that. But it's very funny because the like, there were no casualties is absurd in this particular case. Well, I always forget about this movie that there's also the train heist. You know, you think about that set piece that is the bank vault scene and you kind of forget the train heist is actually amazing. It's super fun. Fantastic. The surfing the car down into the water at the end is like, I mean, maybe some of the best acting Paul Walker's ever done. I love this movie.
I looked it up. You know, that scene was filmed in California. It was called the Arizona Filming Unit, but it was filmed on the California side in the Mojave Desert. But there's not really a desert like that in Brazil. You can probably imagine that they don't have deserts like that. They do have some areas with sand dunes kind of on the northeast coast, and they have an area I think called the Kaalinga. It's a semi-arid tropical area, so there's trees, but you know in the dry season it looks very dry, but it's not like the scrub that we see here in the movie that looks a lot like the Mojave Desert with mountains in the background.
See, legitimately, I did have that question and I didn't look it up like you did. So thank you, James. But I just was like, well, I don't know. Brazil is big. It covers lots of latitudes. So sure. But it makes sense that they filmed it in California.
Yeah. And it would be really far from Rio.
Yeah. But we also get the return of Vince, which for continuity's sake, I'm so proud of them for leaving the like scars on his arms back from movie 1.
I did not even catch that. Good catch.
Yeah.
Good catch.
Yeah. Not a thing they're always known for, that continuity. But I was like, hey, look at that.
The thing that always got to me about the train heist while watching it was taking that sort of blowtorch device and being able to just slice through so easily. So I actually looked up to like, can you slice through like steel or something like that with a blowtorch? And I thought the answer would be no, but there are some torches that were actually created first for military purposes, but they're smaller versions for first responders that can cut through steel in a matter of seconds.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, not as unrealistic as I thought. I think at this point, the unrealistic part is that they usually need cartridges to recharge them.
Okay.
Well, they mentioned
that's
something
off-screen.
about needing gas canisters. That's how Hobbs goes to find them. I was always concerned that like that metal plate of the side just flies off and you see the guy's duck, but yeah, how did they survive that?
Once again, they didn't. I mean, like if you're getting hit with something going at the speed that it appears that it was moving, it's going to be hard to survive.
Well, and the car surfing part, while one of my favorite, single moments in these movies, I'm just curious about this in general when people fall into water, right? Like my understanding is that what kills you or what really injures you is like the flat surface of the water. Hitting the surface of the water is like hitting concrete. You can try to pencil dive and all of that sort of thing. You're still going to be injured. But what I've learned at some point, whether or not it's true, is that if you go into like rough water, so like if something falls in the water and then you fall in after it, that you're better off. Is there anything to that? Like them riding the car down, would they have been better if they'd stayed in the car? Or did it make sense to like jump out halfway through?
Well, I mean, I think like intuitively, I'm not sure about the rough water being that much easier than still water, especially from such a great height. You're still going to have an appreciable velocity when you hit the surface, no matter what. Now, they might be talking about the surface tension of the water is less while it's rough, so you actually need less force to break through. But at some point, you're hitting a surface, and I'm not sure that it's that drastically different. But I love the surfing with the relative velocity, right? Like if you can keep up with the rate at which the car is falling, then you can actually stay on it. That's not unrealistic. But yeah, I still think your body isn't terribly comfortable after it hits the water.
You don't just come up and whip your hair out of your eyes and move on with your life.
My instincts say no on that one.
What happens if you were on the car just a second before it hits the water and then you jump off the car?
Right. Is that like only falling from 10 feet or something?
But then the deceleration on you would be from the landing of the car. At some point, you still have to go from your velocity to zero, basically. You're still going to be suffering from a big deceleration. You honestly want to slow that down as much as possible, right? So that's why I think when you see people doing stunts with multiple impacts, that slow them down. That's more, think of it as trying to keep them as a constant speed when they hit. But yeah, the gain in speed comes from the fall. So if the car and the person hit just a little bit after, then the person's hitting that car at that same speed. And in fact, if the car is rebounding, then the relative velocity says you get hit even harder.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah, because it would bounce back up potentially.
Yeah, that's part of what we call how a core bounce supernova is so explosive. That part of the interior of the star that is infalling towards the dense core is hitting the stuff that has already hit the core and bounced off. Like dropping two plastic balls, one right on top of each other. The one bounces up, hits the one falling down. It gives it even a bigger change in momentum.
Now, what if you break the car on the way down?
What, like hit the brakes in the car?
Yeah.
Put on the parking brake?
I'm not sure the air friction is how those brakes were meant to work.
Yeah, I'm kidding. That definitely comes up is it 6 when they parachute out of planes? No, that's 7. Yeah, I feel like Roman hits the brakes on the way down.
There's a lot of driving when they're falling, like people with their hands on the steering wheels. It's like, nice try.
I'll ask that silly question again in 7.
It makes them feel more secure.
I can see that. Hitting the brakes with both feet. You'd be like, am I doing anything? No, you're not doing anything, honey. All right. Well, let's see what else happens. So there's the like Mia is pregnant sort of storyline going on here too, which, I actually love. It shows off a little bit of Paul Walker's sort of sensitive side and stuff like that. And it keeps them together. I hate it when everybody splits the party, like I want my 3 or 4, however many charismatic leads hanging out together.
One of the things I love about this movie is the simplicity with how they deal with how Tej is an expert at everything. It has some of my favorite lines, and Tej is now good with circuits on his way to becoming a computer mastermind. And then when he knows about the vault, he just says, I had a life before you knew me, O'Connor. perfect, concise writing. These movies do not get enough credit for that. But that was just like, now his backstory is wide open. He can do
Yeah.
anything.
And doesn't Han also say that later on when it's like, how did you get this bank vault? And he's like, I had a life before you. And it's like,
Yes.
Yeah, it's perfect. It is perfectly
Yes.
done.
No, I agree that all I want is that one line. Don't try to explain it to me too much. Don't ignore it, but one line. And so the I had a life before I met you guys is probably the perfect version of that. And we'll get a little bit more into Tej's transition when we talk about movie 8, because there's, it's not super unrealistic, but it definitely would take a lot of work. Yeah, this movie really is Ocean's 11. Toretto's 8 or however many of them there are, right? Because they call in all of their friends, from the different movies. It was sort of surprising to me to go back and see in 5 who hasn't met yet, right? Like Dom doesn't know Roman and Tej because that was movie 2 and Vin Diesel had better things to do. And it's kind of fun and then, introducing everybody to everybody. And Giselle and Han, of course.
Aw,
So.
they're so adorable.
But it is like, this is the movie where the core family finally bonds and sort of their story sticks together.
Yes. And I assume because this one was so effective and popular, that just became the template for all the rest of the movies. And I'm not sorry about it. They still find fun ways to do it, I feel like, every time.
They've assembled the Avengers.
Right. Exactly.
And that is one of the things that surprised me upon the rewatch when I went back and rewatched it instead of spread out over several months like usual, watching them all in a row. It's like, oh yeah, they didn't have the same cast settled down till halfway through the franchise almost. So that is abnormal for sort of this accidental franchise.
Another fun little Easter egg in here is that Han's last name is Solo. They've changed it, I know, but yeah, when they're pulling up the little backgrounds on everybody, Han Solo, spelled SEOUL-OH. Solo.
Oh, so it's a Seoul like Korea.
Yeah, Solo. I love it. It's silly, but I love it.
Also adding to bringing back people, Eva Mendes appears at the very end, being her character from 2. Was it Monica?
I can't remember the character's name at all, but maybe.
And then is never seen again.
Yep, never seen again. Just a little bit to introduce that Letty is still alive. Bum, bum, bum. Yeah, no, I mean, they could easily bring her back. That's the thing is, if I had a bit part or even a big part, right? Eva Mendes was like a main character in 2. I would be waiting for a phone call, for the last 20 years. Like, okay, but when is my character gonna, come back from the dead or get back into the fold or whatever? Because this wouldn't be the first time. So.
Although in this movie, Vince dies and he has not come back yet, right?
That's true.
I think
not yet. Well, that's obviously had to say yet.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so. Monica Fuentes. I just looked it up.
Yeah, well, if she comes back around, that I won't be sorry about it. It might not have been the most three-dimensional character back in movie 2, but there's a lot of potential there.
And they've done a little bit better with the female characters since then.
Yes, though we still definitely get Giselle as, a male gazy character, right? The handprint, bathing suit sort of sequence. And I don't know that she passes the Bechdel test in this. I'd have to go back and watch it for that. But I can only think of her either talking with dudes sort of in a flirtatious manner, or if she's talking to me at any point, I can't imagine it's about anything but dudes.
I don't know. Does it count if Rosa and Mia are talking about the baby at the beginning when she throws up?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, there is the does he know? So it's still about a
right. Yeah, we're still talking about Paul Walker. If we were just talking about how excited she was to be a mom or something like that, maybe. But
yeah, I'm gonna say no pass there. No passing on that.
Remind me if I'm wrong. But now I'll have to on my next rewatch. I'm just gonna make a mental note of at what point did the franchise ever? I'm sure they do, but not yet. That being said, I do like the introduction of Giselle. I really like she's ex-Mossad. She can figure out all of Han's, secrets. We always wonder why he's been so snacky, those sorts of things. I like their rapport. So I'm not really sorry about it in this movie. Right. What other physics things?
Well, there's the favela chase.
Oh, that's right.
Where they're all jumping off of buildings and, through windows. I think it's contractually obligated that The Rock has to go through a window in every film he's in.
Yes, like the Kool-Aid Man.
Yeah, that he goes through at least 2 or 3, and I think he throws Vin through 1 maybe inside the base. How does jumping through windows work on your body?
Well, stunt glass usually helps. This is one of those things, definitely do not recommend that you do that at home, right? Once again, your body's not going to like it. We don't see them nearly as cut up as they should be from the shattered glass. It's still a rapid change in your body's momentum. Your body's going to feel that. I still think we're seeing a little bit of the like, oh, these are enhanced individuals. They haven't fully taken
Yes.
on their superhero form yet, but they are getting there. Normally, what you need to do to punch through something that we would normally think of as being like a really difficult solid to punch through is to hit it with as sharp and as narrow a part as possible with force. So think like board breaking, right? You don't hit it with your hands flat open. You hit it narrow and as hard as you can. And that increases the pressure on that point because pressure is force per area. And so if you have a lot of force, but you decrease the area, that's why like getting stepped on by like a stiletto heel is really, really painful as opposed to somebody stepping on you if they're wearing a tennis shoe. Same weight, but different concentration of the force. So throwing a person through it, spreading that out is actually going to distribute the force and be less pressure than if you could like, I don't know, throw them head first. Now I'm trying to think of how to throw people best through windows.
It might come up. We need to know these things.
Well, if you want to break the glass, you want a single point, but then you want the rest of their body all hitting the rest of the glass at once, it sounds like, to distribute the pressure.
Yeah, it sounds like you need their cooperation. Like if they could just lead, like, I don't know, with their fists, then maybe that's the best thing to do.
I mean, legitimately, that's why, because so many of these stunts are practical. They are throwing people through windows. They are driving trucks through walls. They're just different materials than what they look like. But it is a choreographed. It's a dance, all of it. In this case, at least, you are doing it with their help.
Right. And there are different types of glass, and some of them are more fragile than others. You know, like the one of the things that they do in these movies a lot is they punch through car windows. And we know you can do that, but those tend to be a little bit sturdier than like single paned a window that you might have on an old house. It does involve having your construction materials cooperative. Now I want to know how it's done because one of the things that is amazing about this movie in particular with all of its stunts is how much of it was done practically, even though they had to cheat in some cases, but they still did it.
The way I'm watching it on Movies Anywhere during my rewatch, there's all sorts of little extras and stuff like that. And I mean, even the jumping the car off the cliff, that a lot of that stuff is done practically, including the people falling. Like they show driving a car off a cliff, empty, and then some people diving off of the cliff, and then Paul Walker and Vin Diesel jumping, the 10 feet or whatever. So for that last little bit of the shot. And then obviously the green screen version of it where they're on cables and stuff. So yeah, so that part's done practically. James sent us a link that we'll put in the show notes to a video about how this bank vault one was mostly done practically. And that blew my mind that more of that wasn't CG.
Me too, because I think we really know that this bank vault heist actually couldn't be done the way it was shown. And I think the amount that they had to change the vault, because they have several different vaults that they use in the effects just to get it done, including my personal favorite, the one that's actually on a truck that drives.
Yes.
That's my personal
favorite.
favorite.
A vault built around a truck. And wouldn't that be a fun thing to drive in a parade or something?
Oh my God. Doing that in a parade would be awesome.
I hope that exists in some backlot still somewhere. And when we talk to the person who runs the automotive museum, that would be the kind of car to get. Is the one that has a safe built around it. In the video that we'll share a link to, the stunt coordinator who set up this scene, talks about they really did have a 9,000 pound safe. In the movie, they say it's 10 tons. So that's literally more than twice. I don't understand using the wrong weight, just make it sound cooler. But that's before all of the cash, $100 million worth of money goes into it. But I mean, even I don't know a lot about cars. But I know that you can't pull that kind of payload behind two Dodge Chargers, no matter how, reinforced or souped up they are.
I don't know. GMC, their ads seem to indicate that a Hemi can pull anything. So, if you have two Dodge Chargers, that should be able to pull a lot. My question is you see the vault get knocked over and spun around a bunch of times, but the cables never get tangled.
Right.
No, isn't that very useful of them?
Those never get tangled. They show once or twice the cars coming off a couple of their wheels because, that swinging momentum obviously would be stronger than the car at some point. They do show physics exists in this universe, just not quite to the same degrees that it works here in our universe.
Yeah, I actually did appreciate some of the physics that was shown in it, right? Like when the car takes a curve, Newton's first law, an object wants to remain in its current state of motion. So the vault keeps going in the direction it was in until the tension of the wire tugs on it and changes the direction of the vault, which is actually how that would work. And I think it looked right. I didn't look at it and go like, oh, it wouldn't move that way. It looked right. And I think that's in part because they did so much of it with practical stuff. It's just the thing that they were swinging did not weigh nearly as much as one of those bank vaults would. So that's how they did it. So they didn't actually go get a real bank vault. They built different masses of it to give it the right feel for it while we watched it, which is really, really, really impressive, actually, that they went through that much effort to get it to look. I think it's why the audience buys it, even though the audience should not buy it. Because I'm looking at it going like, isn't it nice that bank vault just kind of fit into that room without really being connected? And it just kind of slid out just like any other sort of bank deposit box that you might have.
Right.
It was probably attached.
Well, if they can order one and it gets delivered, clearly they come unattached, and maybe they cheaped out on the installation and they're just like, let's drop it in like a DVD.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Well, and I have to say, I mean, for me, this is really in the golden day of Paul Walker's, acting and stuff like that too. Like he has always been good at selling the stunts. We know he's in a car on a rig in front of a green screen. He's not doing the actual stunt driving, but he sells it. He's cursing. He's like, oh, and maybe it's just in comparison to Vin Diesel being like super stoic and like, don't worry, I got this, guys. But like Paul Walker being like, whoa, this is a crazy stunt. I cannot believe I'm up on two wheels because I have a bank vault. And he's like looking in his rearview mirror constantly. I'm like, he's really selling this here. And I think that helps with all the cuts back and forth.
The places where the physics breaks down is, they didn't really account for friction. What I mean by that is that they kept hitting different materials, the concrete of the sidewalk, the asphalt of the street. Every two materials as they're in contact with each other has a different, what we call coefficient of friction. And that's why some things slide more easily than others. And then also as they were running into things, they should have been losing momentum. And so they should have been having to restart this heist every time it hit a building. All those poor people in those offices or cafes or whatever that vault was just plowing through. No casualties. But yeah, so it should have been slowing down and speeding up sort of every time. If the vault ever came to a stop, when we talk about frictional forces, there's what we call static friction, which is, the force you have to push with to get something in motion. And then there's the kinetic friction, the force that you need when something's in motion. So if you've ever moved house, you know how like you're pushing on the sofa, but once it starts moving, you're like, oh, good, it's so much easier to push now. That's the difference between static frictional force and kinetic frictional force. And so this vault kept slowing down, coming to a stop. And every time they would have needed to actually start that heist all over again.
Then that's put those little furniture movers on. We just didn't see that part.
No, but that actually is, one of the things that I was saying, how they did the several different vaults with the different masses. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what you would have to do. How fast do they want to shoot the cars moving as they're dragging this thing? You would need a lighter one each time. Right. And so that's why they did that until they finally gave up and said, their version of the furniture movers was the one on the truck.
Right.
We're just going to have it go.
What struck me is that if you had the cars providing a lot of mass on their own and that amount of thrust, essentially, it would be like a rocket towing something smaller. So how big would the cars have to be for it to just drag around this bank vault like it was nothing?
Yeah, you need the mass there, but you also need to think of the tire tread. Believe it or not, what makes your car move forward is friction, is how well the tire in the road meets so that the road can impel it forward. One of the things is, the cars, their tires were actually going to just have a really hard time keeping contact with the road as they were trying to drag this. There's a part where I think Dom swings the vault on kind of an arc in the air. That is dependent on the 4 contact points of that car having enough frictional force to keep that car in place.
Yeah. Well, but it doesn't. The car doesn't stay in place. He jumps out of it at exactly the right time because he knows it's going to jump the car. That is like the epitome of his savant, ability to do these calculations in his head. And it's kind of funny because it is the one time it really affects the car, right? He knows that doing this is going to launch his car into the air. So he jumps out of it. And it's like, no, it should have, if it launched into the air that time, it should have launched into the air many other times or come to a complete halt many other times.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what got me is that like I felt like I could do some of this math in my head, but then again, James sent us this link that we'll put in the show notes where a physicist did the math on all of this. You know, because I was just thinking about it. I was like, okay, say this is 15 tons once it's full of cash and stuff like that. Okay, so that's now 30,000 pounds, right? You know, and a car can tow a couple, you know, I Googled it, like what can a Dodge Charger tow, you know, and with a Hemi, it can tow 2,000 pounds. Okay, so if you connected 15 of these cars, you could tow this vault, but it's not that simple. It's the fact that, yes, you could technically get it to move forward an inch, you know, or go a mile an hour, but we're talking about going much faster than that. We're talking about going through buildings and still going the same speed and all of those sorts of things, much less that crazy thing Dom does at the end where he like swirls it around him. And they came up with 467 cars is what it would take for this to work, which obviously wouldn't work, right? You'd look like the house from Up, you know, with all these cars attached to you.
I got to call some of his numbers into question of the guy who wrote this. And he uses kind of the stack of money as a frame of reference, and they say how much it is as stacks of 20s. But then when you see the amount of money they give Vince, it's not just $20 bill. There's red bills in there, which, you know, to me says euros. So I think they have a variety of denominations. And so it could be that the load of paper cash inside is more fluid.
Right. That's true. Well, yeah, and they also don't account for it moving around too, right? Like it is very full, but it's not so full that nothing's moving, right? So if there's a couple gold bars in there, you know, on the spin cycle, that's also going to affect your thing. I think, yeah, the 467 might not be exact, but it's at least that gives us a range. And I was like a full, you know, factor of 10 off just in my quick, you know, oh, it would take this many cars to tow that. There's a lot more to it. And yeah, the coefficients of friction and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think we can safely say more than two.
More than two.
And then the other thing you have to worry about is when, especially as the vault is swinging around, whatever material that cable is made out of, that means the cable itself is experiencing additional forces as it stretches. And so did the cable reach the breaking point at some point along this? So I didn't even go into that because the vault is problematic enough on its own.
The cable, the hook that hooks the cable onto the vault. If you can push a button and snap it off or whatever, like Dom does to Brian's, yeah, it probably wouldn't put up with these forces.
What type of reinforced bodies on those cars did you need for them to be able to have that attached to them? I'm saying I love my Civic, but my Civic probably would not be happy if I did that to it.
And the cable rips through the top of a police car too. So not only is it the pull apart force of the cable, it's now also getting slashed by the top of a police car it's ripping through.
And that was another part in that stunt video that we watched where they did that for real. Like they did cut 90% of the roof off basically so that it would go quickly. But there was like a driver in that who just had to duck. So that's wild to me.
That is really wild. That is really wild. Let's
Wear
hear
your
it for our
helmet,
stunt
kids.
performers.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
How they get the vault to stop in the trash truck when they're swapping out.
It's true. Once it's going that fast, how do they get it to stop under? Because it's just like an overpass, right? Like they don't have a lot of distance.
No, and I think that's another reason why they had to fudge the physics there, because in reality, I mean, we're talking about can it pull it? We aren't even talking about can it pull it at high speeds? Was it really just going a few miles per hour for the most of this chase? And then we got and I think it was. I think when they were doing most of these stunts, the cars were actually only going a few miles per hour. And then we have to give all credit to our amazing directors of photography that are able to get the angles that make it actually look like they're going faster. But yeah, that vault going fast is just going to plow through a truck if it has to come to a stop that quickly.
Well, what if the truck is moving forward and it's like Spy Hunter, you know, where you have to drive up the moving truck and they just have to time it perfectly so they're all under the overpass at the right time?
I just don't think the width of the overpass would give it enough time, because you're right. Because it's like in that case, it's all about relative velocity, right? And so like, but would they have enough time to do that?
Yeah.
Under an overpass of a certain width.
And it still has to come to a stop before it crashes through the front of the truck and kills whoever's driving it, right?
Yeah, I think Giselle's driving it. Plus, they have to get to switch off the cables and put the new cables on the new one and get that one started from a slower speed if the garbage truck is, you know, moving.
Yeah. And I mean, I like the reveal of that we don't even know how it happened, that we think that they're losing their money but getting away with their, you know, freedom or whatever for now. And then like Ocean's 11 again, it sort of gives you that one scene. I wasn't sure if they were always going to have Hobbs stick around, because we were talking about like our heroes don't kill people. There's no casualties in any of these crazy things. But Hobbs shoots somebody, he shoots Reyes right in the face when he comes upon him on the bridge. And this comes up again in Fast X. And will probably come up in 11, whatever 11 is called, or 10 part 2, or, whatever. But it is kind of out of character, it's like one of our heroes wouldn't have done that, right? So letting Hobbs do that to kill Reyes because he killed his whole team and all that kind of stuff. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it feels a little bit out of place. And I think that later in the movies, once Hobbs is very clearly one of our heroes, he doesn't do stuff like that.
So I got a random anatomy physics question. You see Hobbs sweating all the time and no one else seems to sweat. So how much water do you think he has to drink each day to exude that much perspiration?
I noticed so much sweat from him. I don't know why I had never seen it before.
And now I'm wondering about like the relative humidity and wherever they were filming, because I don't think they actually filmed this in Brazil.
It was mostly filmed. The action stuff was filmed in Puerto Rico. Those big boulevards, they don't really have a lot of those in Rio. So that was all San Juan, Puerto Rico. Some of the favela chase, I think most of that was also in Puerto Rico. Just establishing shots and a few other shots. The office building where Reyes has his office, that's a real building in Rio. And they did something there because I was watching the credits and they mentioned having an armorer in the Rio unit. So they clearly had something with weapons.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, if I was in Puerto Rico, I would be sweating constantly. But yeah, I really did notice it with Hobbs in this one.
And then remember, sweating is good for you. So I'm not so much worried about Hobbs, but the other people that weren't sweating, are they overheating?
This isn't something we thought to ask our doctor when we had him on. This is the only time that the car did its hungry, hungry hippo thing that I felt like it actually made any sort of sense. It's once Dom's car is the only one now connected to the vault, and it tries to take off, I think, from a dead stop. And so it sort of rears up and I'm like, okay, that finally actually looks like a thing a car would do. But I just like that's in every single movie.
Right. But in this case, so often they attempt to show it like being some sort of advantage. And we established with our stunt driver that it is not give an advantage. But in this case, it just looks like, oh, that poor car, it's trying so hard.
Right.
It's trying.
Yeah.
James and Lisa, what would you do with your cut of $100 million? I think they say, what is it, 10? It was 9 ways, and then Vince shows back up. Yeah. So allegedly it's 10 ways. So what would you do with 10 million untraceable dollars?
Finally be able to own a home in San Diego?
I will buy one house in San Diego.
Exactly.
No, I would travel the world. I'd take a nice long trip and show my family the world, visit a lot of Star Wars filming scenes, maybe also visit San Juan, Puerto Rico to check out some of these Fast Five scenes. The bridge is in San Juan, as well as the pier that they use for the final bridge scenes, that because they can't stop traffic there indefinitely and they can't really punch a hole in a working bridge.
I mean, that's probably pretty similar to what I would do in terms of, travel, see things, remove that sort of barrier to traveling the world.
I would definitely travel. I would give a little money to my college and to the Fleet Science Center to make sure that their planetaria can be updated in perpetuity. But to be able to travel, stay at really nice places.
Well, and James, I was thinking about, so you and a friend sort of have the Star Wars travel company or whatever, the galaxy far, far away, to do travel locations and stuff like that for Star Wars. I'm now curious, like I want to go to some Fast and Furious filming locations. I want to drive my car legal speed down some of these boulevards and stuff like that. We should start putting together, a list of those filming locations.
You could definitely start off with Los Angeles for the first movie.
It's true. Then hit up Miami, and then with this movie, start to really travel.
That is a great idea. One of the things that endeared me to this franchise at the beginning was how their Los Angeles looked like Los Angeles. As someone who, I went to UCLA as an undergrad, and I still spend a lot of time in LA. And, in the first movie, of course, you got to see PCH and, the Santa Monica Pier or whatever they did to sort of establish they were in it. But sometimes you're just like, okay, no, they're actually in East Los Angeles. Okay, now they're driving through El Segundo, there's their actual places, and they didn't try to call them anything else. So it's just like some of those neighborhoods are just places you would recognize as an Angelino.
Since we're talking about Los Angeles, I'm curious, James, with your city planning background, especially in Southern California, what do you see in when we are just in Los Angeles, like in terms of the places they choose to have their like illegal drag racing and street racing scenes? I'm always curious if those sort of make sense. Does it make sense that it would be on this street because, oh yeah, there's not that many cross streets or not that many lights or something?
Los Angeles definitely looks like Los Angeles. I grew up going back and forth between LA and San Diego as a kid. So yeah, it feels like LA. As for streets for street racing, you basically need a couple things. You need nice wide streets, preferably very little cross traffic. And you want to have nice, kind of clean, relatively resurfaced streets. You don't want ones with potholes and stuff. You hit one of those and your car could go flying. I think we see it in some of the movies where you see people blocking off the streets as they're setting up, how they don't have the cops show up fairly soon. But again, you pick industrial areas at night and nobody's there at night. And you have these long straightaways. And if I was going to find a way to cut down on street racing in neighborhoods like that, I would put in different traffic calming techniques. That's what we call them. The most basic one that everybody hates is a speed bump. When you put them on residential roads, they tend to be much more gradual than the parking lot speed bump. There's also speed tables, which go up, have a flat part, and then go down. And those are also really good to act as crosswalks. Even just painting stripes on the road that are kind of slightly arrowed. So it visually creates something that makes you feel like you need to go slower. So it kind of is psychological traffic calming. And obviously putting up like little bollards on the sides or, those like orange pylon cone things, starting to even have swerves so your sight lines are off. If you have a straight line and you just slightly zigzag it between blocks, I mean, we're not talking like the Lombard Street in San Francisco, but just where it just slightly goes to the left and then the next block, it just slightly goes to the right. That messes up your sight lines. And so you naturally want to go slower. You don't want to really street race on that because if you want to go in a straight line, it's a lot harder to do so. And then introducing like little choke points at a corner, you have the corner curb bulb out a little bit into the street and it naturally makes an end for car parking and you can have like a bike lane cut through. We see that in some parts of San Diego now as they put in more bike lanes. But again, making it just a little narrow choke point at each intersection makes you want to slow down. And certainly if you're racing, 3 cars across and the lane drops down to 2 lanes, you're going to have some issues there. Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to bring traffic calming into the streets, but the main thing is basically putting obstacles in their way somehow, and there's ways to do that safely so that you can still maintain high traffic volume, but also do it in a way that discourages speeding.
Now I'm fascinated by the idea of psychological traffic calming. That's
Yeah,
really interesting. So basically, you're using sort of almost optical illusions to
exactly.
make people go slower.
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of an optical illusion. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into designing things. It's not just how do we get this road from here to there. It's thinking about all sorts of things with geometry and physics. When you see the yellow signs on on-ramps and stuff that say 20 miles an hour, generally you can get your car about 10 miles an hour faster than that. I don't know if you want to keep that in the episode.
We do not recommend.
We hadn't gotten to the disclaimer part yet.
Right,
we
yeah.
finally got to the disclaimer.
Well, and I the 10 miles an hour thing on those yellow signs, I remember learning in driving school or whatever, the yellow was suggested and white was, the actual legal. And those yellow signs for curves and things like that. It's like, you could do it at 10 miles an hour more than that before you really start to feel out of control. And then every once in a while, there'll be one where it's like, no, that's exactly the speed you should be going. And I feel like it's a lie. That's really interesting. So, and we don't see a lot of highway chases or, the races that come up in every episode for, whatever plot reason are usually on surface roads, not really on a lot of highways.
Those are a lot easier to close off in the middle of the night. Highways, freeways still have traffic on them. But I just want to say that be nice to the people working on the sides of the road, avoid the cone zone, go slow through traffic areas, that it is their workplace and it's really dangerous to have high speed traffic next to them. So definitely watch out for them. I love how for Fast Five, there's going to be a street race where they get the car and we just cut away from it. Just like, let's race. And then the next moment they're driving into the garage with the car that then won.
That's true. We literally just don't have time for this. You guys will see why a little bit later. But I did like the continuity that's the same guy that they go back to and find, I think, in Fast 10. I was like, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, this movie and the way Fast 10 ties back into this movie, they did a really great job of that.
Fast X is great. And I do like, because it is one of the times where we talk about, the collateral damage. It is one of the times that it actually comes around again. I always thought, especially this bank vault scene, like people died. There was collateral damage. It's not as simple as that in terms of the plot, which we'll get into when we cover that movie in a few months. But I think it's interesting. And they did a good job sort of retconning the fact that the events of Fast 10 happened because of the events of Fast 5. It also means you get to revisit the chase and stuff like that a little bit in that movie, which is fun.
Yes.
Well, James, I'm really glad you joined us. Last question is, tell us about your favorite Fast and Furious character.
I have two. Mia, because I can just stare at her all day. She's so
Fair.
And then also Tej, just because he's not the Flash. I mean, he and Roman are like great buddies together because they play off of each other so well. But Tej is understated, and he knows his stuff.
Yeah.
He also can get those zingers in and put Roman in his place.
Yeah, Roman is generally, I think, my favorite character, but I have to say in this movie, he's kind of gross. Like, he doesn't have a lot of redeeming qualities in this movie. He's mostly just talking about women in a derogatory manner. So I think for this movie, I switched to Paul Walker because, yeah, I could stare at him all day in this sort of time of his life. And I also just feel like he brings so much to the movie and to the character in this one in particular.
I really like Tej in this one because this is where we see his story arc take a dramatically different slope, and so after this movie, he becomes somebody else very different than what he started off as, which is kind of cool to see.
Yeah, and we can talk about it more in other ones, but I do like Tej's version of technobabble, especially once we introduce Ramsey. There's a lot of like, sure, I don't know anything about computers, so that sounded like a thing that could be true. But it takes a certain actor to deliver that in a way that doesn't make you want to punch them in the throat. And Ludacris has found that balance.
He is so good. No,
should get him on Star Trek.
He would be excellent because I always think about that's actually my test. If an actor sounds like they make sense while delivering a line on Star Trek.
Right.
So I think Ludacris would pass that test. He does great.
Yeah.
But can you sing it on Star Trek and have it make sense?
I was about to say they missed out on having him on the musical episode. All right. Well, for Rotten Tomatoes, this movie got a 78%, which is awesome and then the audience was even higher, 83%. I like this one-liner because it understands the assignment. So sleek, loud, and over the top, Fast Five proudly embraces its brainless action thrills and injects new life into the franchise. Couldn't have said it better myself. Although I give it 100% personally.
Absolutely.
Yep, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. Well, James, thanks for being here. It was fun to chat science with you as always, and different franchise this time.
Lots of fun.
You never listened to me. Not when I told you he was a cop. Not now. You never trust me. And look where it's gotten us. Look at our family now. I can't go home. Your sister's stuck in this life. Where's Letty, Dom? Where's Letty?
And now we're going to chat with our expert, Brigitte Bork, who is a visual effects artist, and she actually worked on Tokyo Drift. Welcome, Brigitte.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So let's get into it. You're a visual effects artist. Can you give us a quick definition of visual effects?
Sure. Visual effects is the enhancement, the creation, or the manipulation of images, something that would happen outside of what you would capture normally on set through the camera. And yes, I'm an artist. I'm also a visual effects supervisor. So lately I've been in charge of a lot of these.
So you worked on the third movie in the saga, Tokyo Drift, but have you seen the other movies? Do you have like a love for Fast and Furious?
I have to thank you because I hadn't seen these movies for so long. And I went back and started to watch them again. And I had forgotten how fun that first movie was.
Right?
I mean, wasn't it fun? Wasn't it great to watch? It was really entertaining. I just really enjoyed it. And same thing with Tokyo Drift. I hadn't seen that since shortly after we worked on it. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, these films are a lot of fun. I mean, they're entertaining. You can see why it's so popular and why it's just kept going.
Are you able to enjoy these movies, even knowing what you know? I'm glad to hear you still love them, but are you able to enjoy them?
I am. In fact, I was watching these movies again, and what we did was we put a lot of the backgrounds out the windows because obviously you don't want actors going 130 miles an hour down the street. It was hard because I would say, oh, I'm going to see how it holds up. And then you just kind of get caught in the story and you forget to look at all those little details. So no, it doesn't ruin it for me. I really love stories. I love these stories. And it's really easy to get caught up in it and forget to look at those little details of the things you worked on.
That's awesome. I'm glad that that's true. Can you maybe give us a little bit of an understanding about the difference between visual effects and, because we know we've at least been learning as we've been doing our rewatch that a decent amount of the stunts and things like that are done practically. But, can you tell the difference, even if you haven't worked on a movie, can you tell the difference yourself between VFX shots and like practical stunts?
Yes and no. I mean, if you do it right, you fold it into the imagery so that it looks real. But sometimes you can tell. And sometimes it's a matter of, they couldn't really do that. And you can kind of pick out the little things that give it away. But, a lot of the times it is invisible. And a lot of effects and a lot of things that people see in the movies, they are invisible effects. You're not supposed to know that, that we did anything. And then on top of it, if you have a really good story too, it really does bring you into it. Like I said, you forget to look at those things. You're just, enjoying the moment and the story that's being told. The best visual effects are a combination of, if they do something on set, is when visual effects kind of takes over and takes it to the next level. So you have a combination. So a lot of things that you see on these movies or some of it is a combination of two. Like they might do something on set and maybe, you'll go into post, you'll make it bigger, you'll add something to it, or you'll do the impossible stunts with the cars or what have you. And then it really does start to look more realistic.
Right. I remember our stunt driver telling us about flames being a thing where it's like, on set, there's like a tiny little pop or, a small explosion. And then you see that on screen, 6 or 8 or 12 months later. And it's like, oh no, boom,
Right. That's one of the biggest things is you have to be really careful with fire and blowing things up. So it's nice to have a little something to anchor it, right? That little pop that he was talking about, it creates an anchor. It creates something that when you put more effects on top of it in post, it makes it blend into that background and it makes a huge difference. And you were asking if you could tell that when something has been done later, if it doesn't have that anchor, that is kind of a giveaway. And it's little things like reflections or just the way things react. That's probably one of the biggest things that I've been doing for the past few years is enhancing fire and explosions and things like that.
I just love being able to say I've been enhancing fire and explosions. That's great.
Yeah,
it is fun. And I have to tell you, in watching those guys work, because you work closely with the stunt coordinator and with the special effects team. So just to see them do their stuff, it's just wonderful to watch and it's fun. And it is a little bit humbling because you can see how, careful they have to be when they do something like that. And then it's nice to know that you're really going to help make that imagery even bigger and more impressive if it needs it, obviously.
Well, how did you get into this line of work and sort of what has your career progression been over the years?
Well, I did start as an artist a long time ago. And back then it was kind of the beginning of explosion, as you would say, of visual effects and everything. And so it wasn't being taught in schools yet. So, but there were classes that you could get involved in, and that's how I got involved in it. And then I took the traditional route. I got into a company doing roto and paint. It's like the easiest thing. And then I just worked up to compositing, and then I worked up to comp supervising, and then I worked up to visual effects supervising. That's how I progressed. But there's so many different areas that you can move into that you kind of got to have to decide. Do you want to do 2D? Do you want to do 3D? There's people that specialize in cloth simulation. That's all I do is cloth, or people that just do hair, or people that just do crowd duplication, just, making a cast of 2,000 instead of the 20 that they hired that day. There's just so much that can be done. There's the people that specialize in fluid simulation. So that would be water. which used to be extremely difficult. It's a little bit easier now, but that was the route that I chose. I kind of had a photography background, so it felt natural for me to go to the 2D route, and I really enjoy it.
So you work on Tokyo Drift as a lead compositor. What does a VFX compositor do?
The compositor is kind of like the person that takes everything that's given to you and puts it together and makes it all work. So you will have a 3D artist. We didn't do this, but taking it to the extreme, imagine like these cars are doing something physically impossible or dangerous. You might have someone that would model a car. That's one guy, and then it would go to lighting, and then it would go, to animation. Someone have to track the shot. Compositor would get that car, that end result, and we would put it into the shot. Or we would take different layers of something. Like one of the shots that I did was a shot from outside of the car going kind of like a profile shot through the car. There were different layers. So I had a pass with the guys on green screen, and then I had a pass of all the reflections. The great thing about Tokyo Drift, it was in Tokyo. You had all those beautiful reflections on these, perfectly manicured cars. So we had to put all that on and, and add the background behind it, add the grunge on the windows on both sides. So it looked like there was glass. That's kind of like what we did. And then going beyond that, a compositor can do anything from that, from putting the backgrounds out the window to maybe painting out a production light, or adding more fire to the explosion because the one they did on set wasn't big enough, or maybe, they need stuff flying out of that explosion. A 3D artist might do that. A 2D artist would take it. Someone like a compositor would take it and put that all together and integrate it so it actually looked real, like this big event happened on screen.
You mentioned the reflections, and it's one of those things that I couldn't tell you I've ever noticed, but that's probably a good thing, right? Like if I noticed them, it would probably only be because it was done poorly, or, it's like the reflection of, the camera or something like that. And now I'm going to have to do a whole nother pass, just noticing how well that was done.
Well, what you would have noticed, if they weren't there, you would have noticed they were missing. That's kind of the art of compositing, is to put those little details in so that when someone looks at it, they might not say, oh, it's missing reflections, or that grunge pass on the window, that doesn't look right. You would just look at it and say, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, that's some guys in front of a green screen or whatever. Yeah, exactly.
And also the other thing that we did on that particular show was when we put the backgrounds in, we had to animate them. And it was very much a challenge because drifting. And I remember it, all these memories came back when I was watching those car chases, the car sliding left, sliding right. It's doing all these things. And you would get like 45 frames in there in between these two events. And you have to figure out, all right, is that car going left? Was that right? Whose car was that? Who is in that car? And then we had the main supervisor would come in and give notes. And it was all about chassis dynamics. That was the word that I learned on this film. I, never heard of it before, but that's now in my vocabulary, chassis dynamics. What happens to the background when a car is sliding to the left, sliding to the right, if it's tilting a little bit, if he's coming out of that slide? It was a huge thing. And it was a lot of work just to make it look right.
So you worked on the drifting parts of Tokyo Drift, seeing the way the backgrounds passed behind the car. Did you work on any other shots?
That particular show, I remember mostly doing the backgrounds out of the car. And that's the great thing. You look at the cars, the driving, which looking at that, I couldn't be more impressed. Looking at the real driving that they did, that the stunt drivers are absolutely amazing. And then the visual effects shots, in between all that stuff, when you cut back and forth, it worked really well. Okay, I'll say I was pretty proud of the way it came out. I think it looked pretty good. Nothing jarred. But that was primarily what our company did. Now, the way it works is like you have a movie and you have the main visual effects supervisor. His name was Mike Wassel. So he would go to the different companies. Each of us would get a different section or a different kind of effect. So our company mostly did all those backgrounds out the windows. And some of them were complicated. It wasn't just, a profile. Some of it was coming like mine. They use a motion control camera, which is they do the first motion to the guys in the car, and then they would repeat that motion. And that's where the motion control comes in. It repeats it perfectly to turn off all the lights. And that's how you get all your beautiful reflections. And then the compositor would put them all together. But that was the bulk of our work. And it was a lot. And I do remember
Yeah.
all the time that we spent on it, and it did take a lot of time. And a lot of it was, chassis dynamics. It was those notes. Yeah, I'm going to get a chassis dynamic note. You would go in and just figure out how to do it.
I'm wondering now because one of the interviews we did was with a medical doctor, and he pointed out how often the windows are rolled down in their cars. And that's not true really in Tokyo Drift, at least, but in the other movies. And I'm wondering now, because he was thinking about it from you'd get ejected out of the car in an accident, or have your arm cut off if your arm is hanging out the window. That was the doctor's perspective. But I wonder from a VFX perspective, if you're like, oh, the work is so much easier if their windows are rolled down, because you don't have to worry about the reflections and the grunge on the windows and stuff like that.
Well, exactly. And plus, that it's easier for the sound guy. If the windows are down, you can hear what they're saying, and it wasn't that hard for us to add grunge. And a lot of times, even if the window was closed, sometimes we could add a little bit of grunge because sometimes you wouldn't be able to tell they were up. Those cars were spotless. There was no grunge on them at all. So, but we would add a little bit of imperfections so you could see it. But that's what happens sometimes. Because, that's one of the things, like when you see the cars doing the wide shots of the actual stunt drivers, I think most of those windows are closed, but when they shot it, the windows might have been open. I don't even actually remember now.
Just two different ways to look at the same thing. I thought that was interesting.
I know, and you just mentioned the sound guys could hear it better, but in reality, if they were going that fast with the windows open, they wouldn't be able to hear each other in the car.
No.
Yeah, so that's why we would put the grunge and the reflections on the window. So you're like, oh, obviously those windows are closed. But now also you don't want any accidental reflections. You want those reflections to be just in the right spot. You can't block your actor.
Right. So you mentioned I mean, you didn't say tedious or whatever, but I was just sort of thinking of it that way. It's like, all the frames that have to go into something like this. How long would it take to render, say the sequence that your company got, would that be the full car chase? And then would that take what, weeks, months?
I remember working a few months on this for sure. Computers have changed since then. And also, we're all digital now. Back then, we would be looking at everything on film for the final product. So back then, I'm trying to remember how long it took to actually render a particular shot. And that might be only like a second or two of a shot out of a whole sequence, but obviously a lot faster now. Back then, sometimes it would be overnight. But as for the whole sequence, like that tunnel sequence that they were in, I remember that show being with us for a few months, at least. I mean, back then, when you would get a feature, you would spend a good 4 to 6 months sometimes if it was a bigger one, easily.
So you've mentioned computers have changed and stuff. And I'm imagining some of our listeners might want to know some of the details, like hardware specs. What software is the current one that most people go to? Anything you can share with us about that?
All right. Well, let's say going down memory lane. Back then, we were working on a program called Shake. That was Shake. That was the big thing for 2D. For 3D, it was still Houdini and Maya. 2D, we were using Shake. Before that, the big program to use was Cineon. And then after Shake, of course, came Nuke. That's what everyone tends to work on right now. But there's so many programs out there. And the computers, when I first started, I was working on a Flame. And I remember the machine I was working on cost, I believe, $250,000.
Wow.
Whoa.
And now, you could, I don't know, a couple of grand, maybe you could probably pick up a pretty good computer. Rendering is another thing. It does take a lot of memory and stuff. And typically we have something called a farm. That's where you send all your frames to render. There's so many different software packages, and people are it's amazing the innovation that's out there right now. In some of the smaller packages, sometimes they are used for some of these bigger shows like Blender. And a new one that's for exciting thing, for a recent thing, is Unreal Engine, which was a gaming software. That is the new big thing because now we're moving on to volume stages, and Unreal Engine is the way to go for that. And you can capture a lot of these visual effects in camera. But back then, the machines were expensive. And you needed a farm, you need a whole team to maintain them, you need render wranglers to watch the frames, make sure they're done. Projectionist. Back then it was we were still working in film.
So if there was a Tokyo Drift 2 and you were working on some sort of similar type shots, how much less time would you feel like it would probably take now with the leaps in technology since 2006? Like, would it take half the time or even less to do the same work?
I think it would be a lot faster, but you think that it would make things simpler, but I've noticed the deadlines have kind of constricted since back then. It's like back then it was normal to spend 4 to 6 months on a movie. Now, maybe a couple of months. I was working on a television show, we would have a week.
Right.
So it depends. But yes, I think it's not, I wouldn't say it was easier. It's just you have more tools in your toolbox at your disposal in order to get this stuff done. But the same workflow to get those kind of shots the way we did them back then, you would still do it the same way. You just might have a few more tools. And the machines may be faster, but they give you less time. So I don't know.
Right.
Maybe it's not easier.
You just actually mentioned volume stages. Are volume stages becoming more common
They
nowadays?
are, as the prices go down. They are a little bit cost prohibitive. Of course, you know about Mandalorian. That was the first one that really opened everybody's eyes to the possibilities of this. And of course, an LED wall screens, they're expensive. The prices are coming down, and what that's going to do, it's going to bring it into the grasp of more productions. It's going to allow them to afford it a little bit easier. And then you have a whole community of visual effects artists that are just jumping into it, learning how to do Unreal Engine, how to create worlds. I mean, that's what it is. It's a world builder. And it's interesting because what it is, you would think Tokyo Drift is a good example, driving shots. That was something we would do after the film is finished and it's in post. But realistically, you could, on a volume stage, that's what they are doing. They'd put that car on the volume stage, and then they would have that background moving. They would have the reflections. They have the screen. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's screen all around them. They have the screen on top of them. And they have lights, actual, light fixtures that take the pixels from that footage and shine it onto the car. So you get that whole effect of them driving. Though I don't think it would work for Tokyo Drift for the same reason that we had a problem. Which way is that car turning right now? Was he going left? Was he right? It would be impossible. In which case I'd be like, okay, we're gonna have to fix that now, which would be even harder.
I definitely imagine a lot of like car sick people in the volume. If you tried to record a Fast and Furious movie in there, that would be pretty intense.
It is disorienting. I was actually just on a volume stage last week, and somebody who had worked with it was warning, all right, don't look directly at the screen when the camera's moving. You might get a little disoriented. So it is a little weird because you know what it is, the background, it moves not according to the person that's standing in front of it. It moves in relationship to the camera moving around. It could feel like the whole world is spinning around you.
Thank you for answering that question because, I spent a lot of time in a planetarium, and ever since I heard of the idea of volume stages, I had become obsessed. So thank you for sharing that experience with us.
Are there any other visual effects, that are used that really blow you away, that really impress you when you're watching other movies or shows?
Yes. Recently, I started watching a series called One Piece. And the reason why I find it so impressive is because, it's a live action adaptation of anime, and it's really hard to pull that off. And they've done such a good job with it. It really has that quality of anime. And there's a lot of stuff out there. There's so many beautiful shots out there. But the thing that impressed me about that is the way that they made the visual effects feel very much a part of it. And it pushes the story forward, which is, it's the goal of visual effects. It's all about the story. It's not about the effects. And they just did a really good job of it. And I'm continually watching it, trying to think, well, how they really have that feeling. It's not too cartoony. It's not too real. It's a nice combination of both that really, really makes you remember the anime. It really brings it into that space. And I think that's a huge accomplishment. So kudos to everybody. It's the practical effects, the stunts, the visual effects. It's all of that together. Somebody just had a vision of it, and they made all these pieces fit together so nicely that the end result is quite special, I think. And that's the kind of things that impress me, is when something that may seem kind of simple is actually something that is bigger than all the sum of its parts.
Yeah, you're not the first person to recommend that show to me.
So bringing it back to Fast and Furious for a minute, do you have a favorite Fast and Furious character?
Watching Tokyo Drift, my favorite character has to be Han. I think he is, you know what it is, you watch him, he's so cool. Everybody likes the cool character. What made that film likable is that you like him so much that you really feel when he dies. Spoiler alert. You do feel for him. He was a great guy. So I think he was my favorite character. He was the one that, like, oh yeah, that's the guy you can look up to. And when I was watching it, the film made me think of Karate Kid a little bit. And he had a great line in that. What did he say? It's drifting isn't wax on, wax off. You have to really practice at this. So they kind of made a joke of the whole thing, which I thought, okay, now that definitely makes Han my favorite character.
Nice. Solid
He's
choice. Well, and if you haven't seen the other movies, just so you know, in the timeline order, 3 comes after 4, 5, and 6. And I think it's specifically because so many people loved Han that they're like, wait, quick, let's squeeze him in all these other movies before we, kill him off in Tokyo Drift.
I did see that, and it was a great idea, I think, because everyone likes them. Why not keep using them? I am trying to watch them in order, chronological order, not in shooting order.
You could go either way, because I think I've done rewatches where I watch 1, 2, 4, 5, 6 Tokyo Drift, and then I've done it where it's in the number order. So there's no bad way to watch Fast and Furious.
Well, that's the beauty of it. I mean, you can just enjoy it in whatever order you want.
But the physics gets progressively weirder no matter which order you watch it in.
Yes, I can imagine. I have learned, physics is probably a guideline more than a rule for a lot of things, not just the Fast and Furious franchise. It's for everything. But that's what made Tokyo Drift so nice, is the driving was just so impressive and it just looked good. I mean, you just think of, the city, Tokyo, just think of all the lights and all the vitality of that city, and to have something set in that, it was really nice. That's part of the reason why I enjoyed that movie so much is the setting of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, the location is certainly a character in these movies, and Tokyo is a great character. Well, if someone is interested in pursuing VFX as a career, if you get kids asking you and stuff like that, what do you usually recommend?
There's so many different areas that you can move into in visual effects. I think the first thing I would say to someone is to really explore the possibilities. Are you more of a 2D person, a 3D person? And even beyond that, maybe you're more of a producer or a coordinator or, an editor. There's so many things you can do. And then the next thing is to really take classes, learn, what you can. And there's a lot of opportunities for internships just to get your foot in the door. And then you can move around and as you expand your knowledge base. And unlike when I started, there are a lot of colleges, there are a lot of schools that do teach this. I did learn everything I know on the job and with a few classes, but you're always learning. There's always new software. You can't say, oh, I'm a nuke compositor. That's what I do. It's like, well, no, nuke might change into something else, just like Cineon and Shake and all that stuff. So you do have to adapt. But a lot of it is also to really think about the art that goes into it. The whole, even though a lot of this is very technical and you have to be very good at that, at the end of the day, it is an artistic endeavor. You have to have the eye for it. You have to be able to look at something and say, I know what would make that look right, or this looks right. This is what we should do. There's a lot of homework that goes into it before you go into visual effects. You really have to think about where you're going to go. And then there's a route for it. You just have to find it.
So you're still working in this field, just sort of in one of the different job titles and stuff like that over the years since 2006. Are there any other projects you can talk about or that really stand out to you as being fun and fulfilling?
Shortly before that, I got to work on The Chronicles of Riddick, which was another Vin Diesel movie. So I felt like I was on the Vin Diesel road for a while.
Not such a bad road to be on.
No, actually, it was at a different facility that I worked at for that one, and I really enjoyed that movie, and it looked, in different worlds and stuff. So it was a lot of fun. Well, I started out back in the beginning, as an artist, I worked my way up. What you do is moved into a comp supervisor, and that's where, like on the Tokyo Drift, my job would be, I would have people, okay, we're all going to work on this car sequence in the tunnel. I would set the look for it, set up scripts, give them to everybody, and then everybody would work at it. And that was to ensure that everyone has, this look would be similar. So you wouldn't get, 10 different looks from 10 different people. And then after that, I moved up into visual effects supervising, which is managing the comp supervisors who manage a lot of the artists, and also the 3D work going to set and managing the things that they shot to make sure that we have the material we have, and making sure it all gets done on time and everybody has the material that they need, make sure that the client knows what they're going to get, and that we're doing what the client wants. So there's a lot of management going on in that, and a lot of supervising. So back then, I was working on a lot of features. And when I moved up to a visual effects supervisor, I've been doing a lot more TV. And we were working on, for the past 4 years, 911 Lone Star. The fun thing about that is that every week it was something new. We still have the fire and explosions, but we have the medical emergencies. It's just like everything that you did on the features except in overdrive. It's like, okay, you've got a week now. We've got to get 100 shots out. It's been a lot of fun. It's a challenge. It's solving puzzles all the time, but it is a lot of fun. And you learn everything that you learn from working on the features, and even through your career as you just keep moving up and keep moving forward. It's a lot to learn, and you just throw it into the projects that you have.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time and you sharing your expertise. I mean, every time I talk to anybody about Fast and Furious, it makes me want to go watch the movies again. So this is a good excuse to pull up Tokyo Drift again.
Yeah, and thank you for calling me in, because I haven't watched those films in so long, and I haven't even caught up to more recent ones. I'm hooked now. I'm going to go back and continue to watch them all to the end. Did see a few breakdowns for the recent one, and it was like, wow, that's pretty intense.
You're in for a wild ride as you finish.
They have come a long way from doing the standard over a ramp jumps and sparks and a couple of flames to, I don't know, I think I saw like helicopters and stuff and cliffs and lots of stuff.
Yeah,
Yep.
I don't want to spoil anything for you because it's a great ride, honestly.
It's the whole point of it, right? It's just to be fun and have a great ride and for people to enjoy it. And you can stretch the reality a little bit.
Absolutely.
Thank you so very much. This has been great to talk to you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Toast. Toast. Money will come and go. We know that. The most important thing in life will always be the people in this room. Right here. Right now. Salute me, familia. Salute.
That wraps up this episode of The Facts and the Furious. We want to thank our guest, Brigitte Bork, and thanks to James for all of his insights and all of the pun titles for our podcast episode names. And most importantly, we want to thank all of you for listening. Check out the show notes for links to our guests and more info. And remember, reality-based physics comes and goes, but family is forever.
We'll see you next time on The Facts and the Furious when we discuss the 6th movie, Fast and Furious 6, and we'll welcome an expert in filming locations to the family. Vroom.
Vroom, vroom.